Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Huskies, and welcome to Elevate Career Hacks Online Professional Development Workshops. My name is Samantha Morris Avery, and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Relations here at the UConn Office of Alumni Relations. On behalf of the UConn Foundation, we're excited for today's discussion on how to make yourself marketable during a recession. Today's presentation will feature three panelists who have different perspectives on how to showcase your worth and set yourself up for success. Whether in preparation of or going through a recession, we hope these tips and tricks will help you feel comfortable navigating your financial future. Before we begin, a few areas of note to help you manage your webinar participation. There will be an opportunity to ask questions by typing them into the question box on your control panel. Feel free to type them in as you think of them, and we will address as many as possible throughout until the end of the session. Closed captioning is available by clicking the CC button on your Zoom toolbar. A survey will be sent as follow-up. We would appreciate it if you fill it out so that we can continue to bring these types of webinars that you can use to enhance your careers. This webinar will be recorded, so please visit our YouTube page at youtube.com/UConn alumni sometime later this week to review and view previously conducted presentations. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's program. Today's moderator, Randy Siller, received his Bachelor of Science in Accounting with a minor in Finance from the UConn School of Business in 1979, graduating with distinction. He continued his academic career at Pace University, earning his master's in taxation, as well as completing Harvard University's Financial Leadership Program. Randy earned the designation of Certified Public Accountant and Certified Investment Management Analyst in conjunction with the Wharton School of Business. Randy started in Big 8 accounting with Coopers and Lybrand and Tucci Ross, then became a tax planning director at Cigna Individual Finance Services. There he met Jeff Cohen, and together they founded Siller & Cohen Family Wealth Advisors over 30 years ago. While affiliated with Lincoln Financial Advisors, Randy ran Lincoln's Metro New York, New Jersey region. Under Randy's leadership as regional CEO, the region grew in revenue and profitability from the middle of the pack to number 1 out of 40 regions in only 3 years. Today, Siller & Cohen is a nationally recognized financial advisory firm which manages over $1 billion in investments and over $1 billion in life insurance. Randy is a member of the UConn School of Business Dean's Advisory Cabinet, where he serves on the Publicity Subcommittee. He also serves on the Hightower Advisors Executive Leadership Committee. He's recently the chair of the New York State Society of CPA Estate Planning Committee and has been featured in Marshall Loeb's best-selling financial advice book. Philanthropy has always been important to Randy, and he serves on the board of the Community Health Care Network for over 10 years and has created a donor-advised fund that is managed by his daughters. He created the Siller Family Leadership Scholarship, which provides a student annually with a cost of attendance scholarship in addition to a scholarship in the NEAG School of Education in honor of his father, Bernard, who was an educator. Randy is an avid UConn basketball fan and enjoys going to the games, including the 2023 Final Four where the men won the championship. It is my pleasure to have the opportunity to welcome Randy as today's moderator. Randy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Samantha. I appreciate that. Go Huskies. What a great year in men's basketball. It was a lot of fun. I've got my UConn cufflinks on. I'm all ready for today. So excited to be here and talk about how to make yourself marketable during a recession. What I thought we would do is start with Nick Strang today. Nick is actually a member of our team at Siller & Cohen. He's a private wealth advisor and a key member of our investment committee. Nick is a certified financial planner. By way of background, he did not go to UConn, but we don't hold that against him. He did go to Hobart and William Smith colleges, where he studied economics and was the quarterback for the football team, setting a number of records during his time there. Nick lives in Poughkeepsie, New York, with his wife, Nicole. His daughters, Alessandra and Penelope, and their Great Dane, Brooklyn. So Nick's got a lot going on, a lot of family members, big dog running around the house. Nick, let's start out with, let's talk about some basics and fundamentals, okay? Let's talk about what is a recession.
Yep. So thank you everyone for having me, and thanks Randy for that very courteous introduction. Yeah, this is a very topical question of what is a recession, because it seems like everything's always changing, and the goalposts are moving a bunch. But the technical definition in which economists look at is, what is our GDP, or our gross domestic product, doing? And all that measures is the output of our country. How much are we producing? If that metric is contracting or declining for 2 consecutive quarters, that's what they call a technical recession. Now, our government and the Federal Reserve, our central bank, look at a whole slew of metrics, looking at employment numbers, inflation, wages, what's going on with credit lending. There's quite a bit of metrics they look at when determining if we are in or going into a recession.
All right, Nick, let's take a quick look at your crystal ball. And are we going to have a recession? And if so, when would you expect it to start? What's your current thinking?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if you ask any economists, they will say, half of them will probably say we are going into a recession. Half of them will say we're just in a slow growth environment. And if you asked them that a year ago, they would have said the same thing for this year. I think it's the most difficult thing, pointing back to the GDP, Randy. If you look at the last quarter, the growth rate was 4.9%. Our 20-year average is 2%. So our country has actually been very resilient and producing very well. Now, with that, you still have high inflation, and you still have our central bank, the Federal Reserve, raising interest rates to slow down that growth. So I do think that there's an expectation we will go into a recession sometime next year. I think that's where majority lies. If not, maybe towards the year following that. And the reason I'm hesitant on the timing is because we've seen individuals and families be very resilient, and companies with that as well. We've seen very good metrics that point towards continuing to grow our economy rather than it slow down sooner rather than later.
So, Nick, one of the purposes of today's conference is to talk about jobs, job safety, the ability to get a new job if necessary. Talk a little bit about what happens during a recession. What do you typically see from an unemployment standpoint, a jobs quit standpoint? Talk a little bit about that.
Yep. This has been one of the most interesting things to look at from terms of investing and when you're looking at our economy, because the pandemic threw a wrench into a lot of the numbers that the Federal Reserve and other economists look at. I give the example of, they estimate maybe 1.5 million workers left the workforce during the pandemic for a multitude of reasons. Depending on your profession, you might have retired early, or it may not have been as safe during that time period. And if you look at different age groups, some of those workforce participants didn't come back to the workforce. They just remained retired. But also in looking at the current jobs environment, typically you'll hear reference the unemployment number. How much of our individuals are unemployed? And that number is now 3.9%. If you look at the low of what we hit was 3.5% over a year ago. And the average is even more than that. It's around 5%, depending if you're looking at 50 years or 25 years.
So unemployment's still relatively low.
It is. It's still relatively low. But the caveat being, what are we doing with wage growth and what's going on with job growth? So we've started to see, and this is again something that the central bank looks at, the Fed, you start to see the number of jobs being added slow down, which would start to indicate, okay, our economy is slowing down because companies are adding less jobs. Think about in the reference of, if a company is starting to feel strain or stress, they're probably not going to hire as much. And you're starting to see some of those metrics take place. You're also starting to see metrics like quits. And if you're looking at a JOLTS report, the percentage of employed individuals quitting their jobs is starting to decrease. Because typically what you see in a recession is individuals are less likely to quit because they're more fearful of getting the next job. or they want to make sure that they're more secure, so they're willing to stay in their current situation, even if it's not as conducive as they'd like.
Thank you, Nick. Well, if we're going to talk about keeping your job or transitioning to another job, who better to talk about that than Tracy Harrison, who is a director of HR. Let me introduce Tracy. So Tracy graduated from UConn in 2009, and she joined Pinebrook Country Club in 2020 as a human resources manager, where she built the HR department from the ground up. Prior to joining the Pinebrook team, Tracy started her career at the Harpoon Beer Hall as their human, that must be interesting, as their human resources and front of house manager. I'm sure you have some stories to tell us about that, Tracy, if we have a little more time. She has over 9 years of experience in HR and hospitality management. Tracy received her SHRM-CP, which is an HR certification, in 2020. She also holds a law degree from Suffolk University Law School with a labor and employment law concentration. Originally from Rochester, New York, she now lives in New Hampshire with her boyfriend and their dog, Fidget. She enjoys reading, working out, and cooking. Before we ask you some of the serious questions here, Tracy, what kind of dog is Fidget?
He is a mix. So he has some terrier, some American Pit Bull. He's very active. He likes to go outside and try to hunt chipmunks and rabbits. And so he's very happy to be in New Hampshire with some lawn space. We lived in Boston beforehand, so he's very happy with his lawn now.
That's great. We have dog lovers on here. We also just got a dog a couple of months ago. I fought my 13-year-old for 9 years about not getting a dog because we live in Manhattan, not the easiest place to have a dog, but they're a lot of fun to have around.
Oh, yeah.
So Tracy, do you find that employers' expectations change during a recession? What are your thoughts about that?
So I would say yes. I mean, Nick kind of talked a little bit about it, but it kind of also depends on the industry, right? If it's a tech or a startup, definitely going to be more front of the mind than consumer staples or utilities, things that people need. It's going to change the expectations a little bit there. So it obviously depends on the industry. But I do think that it changes. I think that they wanted to make sure that their employees are engaged with them, that their employees can learn some new skills potentially, that they're a good team player. Maybe they're picking up some slack for some other employees if there were layoffs or going to be layoffs. They really have to kind of think smart about what you would call people capital. How can we make sure everyone's being efficient, and how can we make sure that their compensation is correct, and things like that. So I think there's different expectations, and different expectations for a job candidate as well. If they are, for whatever reason, looking to hire someone, what can this person bring to the table? What are their skills that they have? Do they have a positive attitude? Are they willing to learn something new that maybe is outside of the normal responsibilities that could really add value to that company?
So maybe be a little more user-friendly during a recession. And what about, you're nervous about a recession. How do you feel about bringing it up with your employer? Is it okay to do that, to talk about that, to talk about your concerns? What would your reaction be to that?
Yeah, I would say yes, but I would also say do your research first. You don't just want to make it into like a small talk of like, oh, how about that recession that's coming up, right? Do a little bit more research and find out or figure out kind of the questions or the answers that you want. So maybe you ask, how do you think this will affect the company? Do you expect that there might be some layoffs? How will this affect my role as an individual? Is the company preparing for the recession in any way? Or is there anything that I should know about as an employee here to ensure the success of the company or of my position? So yes, I think it's absolutely okay and should be talked about if you're concerned about it, but make sure that you're prepared with relevant questions and not just broadly asking about what a recession is, if a recession is going to happen, or what they think about it.
And Tracy, who would you recommend they speak to about it? Should it be their immediate supervisor? Should it be somebody in HR if the company's large enough to have an HR department? Any thoughts on that?
So I think it depends a little bit. I would certainly go to your direct supervisor, but depending on their role, they might not really be seeing the bigger picture or be focused on that. So if there is an HR department and you have a good relationship with them, I would encourage the person to speak with them as well. But I would start first with your, direct supervisor and kind of go from there. If they're not really sure or not answering your questions, maybe say, hey, is there someone else I can talk to, just to get a better understanding. You don't want them to think that you're in kind of crisis mode, but you'd want to also have some reassurance from your employer that they've thought about these things, that they're preparing at least a little bit for the potential for a recession.
Right. And if you are concerned about it, what might you do to prepare for it other than just asking the question? What kinds of things would you recommend?
Well, I would first and foremost make sure that you're doing your job well, and hope that you really are adding value to the organization. I would try to come in with a positive attitude. I mean, a lot of things also have to do with the company culture, right? If there's some suspicions of a recession or layoffs, that's definitely going to affect how employees act at work. So I think trying to keep a level head about it, try not to be fear mongering, and ask the questions directly to the people that hopefully have the answers, and ask your supervisor, hey, are there other things that I can help out with, I can add value, or I can ensure that I'm going to be here if and when a recession happens. I think the obvious answer is make sure your resume is also up to date, and start thinking a little bit about if I were to be laid off, what are my next steps? Like I said, I don't think you need to go into crisis mode, but it's always good to plan for those types of things to happen.
So again, if we go into a recession, I think what you're basically saying is, check yourself and see what kind of job are you really doing? Are you putting the effort into things you could do better, which makes you more likely to be retained during a recession?
Yeah. And I think maybe seeing a little bit of the bigger picture. There are a lot of people that maybe walk around with blinders on saying, oh, this is my job and this is what I need to do, and not thinking about maybe the other things that are going on. Maybe take a step back and see, oh, this department might need help here or there. Maybe I should ask about that. Maybe I should show an interest, be proactive with my skills and my abilities, and reach out and say, hey, if they need help with this, please let me know. I'm happy to jump in and help out where I can. I think just having those conversations and making sure that the employer is aware that you're a team player and that you're someone that can easily pivot and learn something new, knowing that it's important.
So again, sounds like make yourself as valuable as you can so you're not part of that group that may end up getting cut if we're going through a recession. Very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Nick, pivoting back for a minute, when we use the word recession, I think it's pretty scary to people. How common are recessions? How long do they typically last? What are we looking at here?
Yeah. So if you go back roughly 70 years, we've had 10, 11 recessions over that time frame. On average, I think what is interesting to hear is the timeline of a recession. I think is pretty shocking to people, because when you go through it, it feels way much worse when you step back and look at it from an analytical sense. But on average, a recession lasts 10 months, not even a year. And if you look at conversely, an expansion, or when our economy is humming along, on average lasts 69 months. So about 7 times the time frame. So even though going through it feels horrible, and it feels a lot worse and can for certain individuals versus others, just know that it's not going to last forever. It is a time frame of strain, but like I said, 10 months on average, compared to a 70-year time frame.
That's a good perspective. You would think that if an employer has a good solid business and a good solid business model, knowing those statistics, if they do, that they might try to keep everybody around if they've got good employees through that short time frame to then be able to grow again and have the right people there. Obviously, not everybody has that information or thinks that way, but kind of interesting. Nick, what about, are all recessions alike? Are some deeper than others? And how would you, what are your thoughts on this upcoming potential recession?
Yeah, I think, to your first point, Randy, Tracy kind of hit on it with it being industry and sector specific. Think about what the Federal Reserve is trying to do to us. And Randy, I'll pose a question to you. If you're a new business, given that rates are so high right now, would you be more apt to start a new business, or would you wait to do that until rates were lower?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I probably would wait if I didn't have the capital and had to borrow. I wouldn't want to start a business with these type of interest rates.
And that's what we're finding a lot of tech and startup industry specifically versus what Tracy mentioned, consumer staples or a healthcare industry. You're seeing a lot more in that area where businesses are less apt to start up because rates are higher, or businesses that started are going through more strain in the hiring process because of the fact that the cost to borrow is more or a lot more expensive. So I think we're seeing that environment, and that is not dissimilar to a lot of recessions, but it is dissimilar to how we arrived there. And we'll talk, you could talk about 2020, which was actually technically a recession. If you look at it, you could look at 2008, and how you arrive at different recessions is the big question. Right now, our Federal Reserve and what everyone is feeling is inflation. Inflation is very topical because it's not just something that talking heads talk about. You feel it when you go to the grocery store. You feel it when you go to the gas pump. You feel it when you have to choose to buy a house or rent a home. You feel it when healthcare costs come up. Everywhere you turn, inflation is in your face one way or another. And that is something that the Federal Reserve is trying to accommodate and make sure that they get that under control. Because we've seen past environments, not of recently, but if you look at the 70s, we've seen environments where inflation can exacerbate. You've also seen other countries that deal with inflation and have had what they call hyperinflation, environments where inflation runs rampant. And then it has a lot of implications for a country's currency and a lot of other things, but really the economy does worsen quite a bit during those environments. So that's what we're seeing currently is the main focus.
That's helpful, Nick. Tracy, we have a question that came in, and this is certainly more in your area, so I'll throw it to you. Based on the job hunt, been on the job hunt for 6 months now, applied to over 100 roles, have had countless final round interviews, but not a single job offer yet to show for it. Do you have any tips or advice for someone feeling stuck and struggling to advance in their career?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot. And I commend that person for their tenacity and not being discouraged. I mean, it's hard out there to get applying. I mean, I was unemployed actually. I had kind of an in-between harpoon to where I am now, where you get ghosted by the employer, you're not hearing anything back. The process takes a really long time, and I think it's easy to get frustrated about. So I think sometimes take the break, take a deep breath, do something enjoyable with your time. And but I would say, practice talking about your experience. And I would maybe reach out to some of those companies or organizations to find out if they can shed any light on why someone else was hired over them. Is it more the experience, or was it, a personality fit type of thing? Some people won't get back to you. It's can be a little bit awkward, but I would say, if you've been applying to a lot of positions and getting those final round interviews, what is it really coming down to? Is it coming down to compensation, experience? Experience you're not really going to be able to do anything about. You have the experience that you have, but I would encourage people that maybe don't have as much experience to look at their experience, be able to talk about it really well, practice talking about it, be able to talk about it in multiple ways and why that matters to the potential employer. And I think also having some self-awareness and saying, you know, I might not have as much experience, but I'm really eager to learn. I'm willing to learn the way that you do it. And so some ways it can be better to have someone that has less experience because, you know, you're really able to teach them the way that you want it done versus trying to break out of some of those other habits that they've learned someplace else. And so, you know, I would also use some other resources as well. You know, when I was unemployed, I actually used I didn't use UConn. I'm sorry, UConn. Now I feel bad, but I used career services through Suffolk. I initially thought I did want to go into law, back into law specific more than HR. There are parallels there and compliance that is still has legal ties, but I was thinking maybe I wanted to go into a firm and all of that. So, but reach out to career services. I think at UConn it's called Center for Career Development. They can look at your resume, they can talk to you about things, they can do mock interviews to provide feedback for you. I think state-run services as well. I actually used in Massachusetts, Mass Hire. They have centers that have, you know, computers, copiers, job boards, other resources, people coming in and talking with you, trainings, kind of a lot of things that I was not aware that was even offered. That's all free. So it's nice to have some of those free resources. And the other big thing that I would recommend is using a recruiting firm. There's so many different firms out there in all different industries. Just if you Google, you know, recruiting firm, hospitality, Boston, it'll pull. So pull where your region is, the industry you're looking for, and start there. That's completely free to you as the candidate. And it helps prepare you for the interview. They help, what I say, they help find the perfect match. You know, they are familiar with the companies that they're working with, and then they can talk with you and say, this is kind of what they're looking for. Does that sound good to you? And help you prepare and make sure that some of those questions maybe you don't want to ask in the interview, you can ask the recruiter and get some information from them to really find out, is it worth going in for an interview with these people? So they also can help on the back end, post interview. What did you like? What did you not like? Do you want to move forward with this process? And so they're kind of a good conduit for you to be getting better selected jobs to apply for. So
some good tips there, Tracy. I like that. I particularly like, you know, be a little bit proactive and reach out to some of those firms you didn't get the job with. And again, they may not, but all you need is one to give you some hints, and maybe they will try to help. I really like the idea of reaching out to UConn. That I didn't know that actually, that they would do possibly help you with the interview. Definitely look at your resume. I'm looking at, you know, I've applied for over 100 roles. I see you've had a bunch of final round interviews. So two things there. One is, let's make sure the resume is getting you in and you're positioning yourself well. So I think that's a really good idea. And then if you can do mock interviews with them or with a recruiting firm, I think also very important. I've actually been in the role of hiring for a number of years now, once for a Fortune 500 company in a prior life and with my own firm. And I will tell you that when you put a job offer out there, you get a ton of resumes. And there's sometimes that literally you take 30 seconds to look through a resume and something either jumps off the page positive or negative, and you put it in one pile versus the other and you go from there. So you need to think about that. Maybe even put your resume aside, pick it up real quickly and what jumps off the page, or have a friend take a look at it.
and you know, not to
Please.
interrupt, but I would also look at the job description that they have and pick out some of those key words that they're using and make sure that you have that on your resume. And attention to detail, if there's a typo or you address, you know, I had someone apply that addressed a different club. They said, oh, I would love to work at this club. And I said, well, that's great. You apply to a different club. So it can be very hard sometimes to get over that as an HR director because you're like, that was something very easy for them to change out. So pay attention to detail, have someone, if you're not great at it, have someone else look at it, look at the job description, like I said, to make sure that some of their language is matching your resume. And also you might have a couple different resumes, right? If it's more hospitality based, maybe you highlight more of your hospitality experience. If it's more tech based, make sure you're highlighting the tech on your resume. So really making sure that you're highlighting the right things, because like you said, Randy, I look at resumes pretty quickly. I would say 30 seconds to a minute, see what their skills are, see their experience, see how that matches up, and put it into a yes, no, maybe pile. So I would absolutely look to make some edits.
So we have a follow-up question, somewhat related. I think you've addressed some of this, but it might be good to kind of summarize it. And before I read this, I'm going to ask Samantha if she can jump on in a minute. And is there an email or someplace that anybody watching this can reach out to if they want help from UConn in resume building and or mock interview? Samantha, is there someplace they can do? Can they email you and you can put them in touch with the right person? What would you recommend?
Yes, so how about I'll put my email in the chat and shoot me an email, kind of send me your situation, and we'll go through the best kind of route on getting you connected with the right person. So I'll put that in the chat box right now.
Thank you, Samantha. We're here to help, so that hopefully will be very helpful. Okay, one more coming your way, Tracy. So related to the above question, as someone who's experiencing the same thing as this other person and not getting the role in the end, but requesting feedback and being told that there wasn't anything you need to improve on and nothing you need to improve on, what do you do then?
I think, unfortunately, you have to accept it. And I know it's cliche, but it's always, you get a lot of no's before you get a yes. So every no hopefully leads you to that yes. And I commend people that have been in the job hunt for a long time. I was, I don't want to say it worked out, but mine was during COVID. So it was a little bit different of a time, but it can be, like I said, very discouraging. So sometimes maybe it's take a couple days off from the job search, take a deep breath, spend some time with family, friends, pets, and really kind of recenter yourself, and know, what else can I do? What are the other things? How can I continue to stay positive about it?
Yeah, and it may be that you did a good job, but maybe there was a candidate that just blew them away, and that's happening. The other thing I would maybe challenge a little bit, and I think Tracy, you kind of alluded to this before, maybe not as directly, but if somebody came back to us and asked us what they could improve, I will tell you that in the back of my mind, I'd be a little bit worried about what I say and how I say it, because everybody sues everybody today. So it's easy to just say, oh, you were fine. So I might take those responses with a little bit of a grain of salt, because it's easier for the employer to say that. They take no risk by doing that. And maybe take a harder look in the mirror and say, there must be something here I can do better. Or again, reach out to UConn or a recruiter, as Tracy suggested.
Yeah. And I would even say, practice in the mirror, practice to your family and friends. Say, hey, I'm going to just rattle off my experience and why it matters. I really think it's important when you go into an interview to be confident with your skills, your experience, be able to talk about why it matters to the organization that you're interviewing with, to really show your value and the ability to communicate well. I think that's something that's really important. Is verbal communication. Are you making eye contact? Are you shaking the person's hand? And are you asking relevant questions? Did you do the research ahead of time on the company or even the person that is interviewing you? Some people don't put a lot of stock into that, but I'm someone that's type A and I like to plan and I research kind of everything. It helps actually build my confidence when I go in the room. I know a little bit more about the organization, how they're set up, who these people are. So it helps put me at ease more. So I am more confident. And then it also helps, you can ask specific relevant questions to show the company or the person interviewing you that this person really cares. This person came in, had everything together. And not only that, but they're asking relevant questions where I can tell that they are engaged in the process. So I think, doing that research ahead of time, like I said, practice with whoever, practice in a mirror, and just get feedback. Maybe though your friends or family would be more honest with you. Maybe it's that you do have to practice talking a little bit better about your experience, speaking more as statements versus questions. It takes time and practice. I mean, I was a tour guide, so I think that helps me with a little bit of that public speaking aspect. But it wasn't easy at first. So you have to really practice those things and be comfortable with that.
Hey, Tracy, we got another one that just came up. What's expected in interview etiquette for virtual interviews? Because you can't shake their hands.
Yeah. I mean, just making eye contact, making sure that you're not like looking around the room. I know you notice eye movements more, I would say, when you're on a virtual call or interview. So I think make sure to get any of the distractions away from you, whether that's a dog, your phone, TV, any of that stuff. Just make sure that that's not going to be there. So you're looking this way or that way, or make sure that you're speaking clearly, that you're, in frame, that there's not too much going on in the background. Maybe you use the blur function. But I think making sure that you make eye contact, making sure that you look like you're engaged. Obviously, you can jot down some notes or have notes already written down that you have prepared. But I think just making sure that you are trying to be as engaged as you can through video.
I think that's great. The other thing that I noticed, and sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not, is to move the picture of the person around and as close to the camera as possible, right? Because if the picture floats down and your camera's up here, it can look like you're disengaged.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I actually, Randy, you were over on the other side of my screen, so I had to move you over because I kept looking this way, and I'm like, oh no, people think I'm looking over at the other part of the room when I'm really just trying to look at you. So you're right, absolutely. It's a lot of those little things that that can matter or unfortunately, make the difference in how the interview goes and whether you move on to a final round or get the offer.
I would add one other thing is be careful with canned responses. As an employer, when I'm going through interviews and somebody just gives me a canned response that they think I want to hear, it turns me off and I'm going to go the other way with it. And I would also suggest be as real about you as you can, because again, it comes through. It comes through whether it's just words and talk, or whether, no, this person's really talking about themselves and who they are at the core. So I think that's important too. And with a good interviewer, they can tell.
Oh yeah. Yep. Have self-awareness. Be open to knowing what your strengths and challenges are and being okay with kind of sharing those. I think is something, like you said, is very, very important. From an interviewer process, we want to make sure that, or perspective, we want to make sure that this person is confident, but they also know the areas that they need to work on a little bit more. And they're okay with acknowledging maybe a mistake that they made and holding themselves accountable and learning from those types of things.
Yeah, everybody wants an employee who's coachable, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, good. All right, we'll look for other questions that come in. Those were good, and I think good back and forth and some good ideas there, Tracy. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Nick, jumping back to you for a minute, we're talking about recessions. And I guess a little bit, we were talking about how this one may be a little different than some others because of inflation and the costs that we see. I think the last one people really remember, 2020 was just such a strange time, was back in 2008. I think everybody kind of remembers that. Do you expect this to be like 08? 08 lasted long. It was hard. It was deep. How would you, what's your expectation of this potential recession versus what we went through in 08?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a good barometer when looking at not just markets, but also looking at what's going on in the economy and especially in the workplace. I would say the expectation is this is going to be different. Similar from a business cycle standpoint, but different from a timing and also a magnitude perspective. If you think about 2008, we had essentially an asset bubble crisis. The housing market became very disturbed, disrupted. And if you think about individuals and families, your biggest asset and your biggest liability is your house and your mortgage. So that was very disruptive for individuals. If you look at a family's balance sheet per se, 60% of that is mortgages. Only about 10% is auto loans and 10% is student loans. Others are credit card debt, etc. So I think that the fact that there was such a significant asset and liability affected that hurt individuals and consumers, that's why 2008 was a very disruptive time. This time around, inflation certainly affects people, but if you look at the numbers, inflation peaked the year-over-year growth in June of 2022. It was at 9% growth rate. Now we're down to about 4%. So even though inflation is still higher than what we would like, it's coming and moving in a more optimistic direction, which is what's leading people to believe that this is not going to be a deep recession like 2008. This isn't going to hurt us in a great magnitude as like that time frame. It should be a bit different from that.
Well, consumer-driven economy, unemployment still near record lows.
Mhm.
That all bodes well, right, for a mild recession.
Certainly.
So let me switch gears for a minute and let's do a practical question. Let me ask you about investing just for a minute. Not a general investment question, but let's say that we have people on the call who have left a job recently, looking at a new job, or maybe they're going to, if recession hits, maybe for various reasons, they're going to be looking for a new job and they have the risk of being let go. Most people have a 401k plan. What are your thoughts about heading into a recession, what to do with a 401k plan? Maybe I'm worried about being let go and there's time between then and when I get my next job. I may need to tap my 401k plan in the interim to help pay my bills.
Yep.
What type of investments typically hold up better during a recession? And what are your thoughts if I do need to tap my 401k plan and whether I'm over 59 and a half or not, some of those rules, can you help us with that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the planning aspect of it, Randy, is very important because I mentioned that 10 months in a 70-year time period seems like nothing, but 10 months when you're going through it feels like forever. So what I tell individuals or people that come in to talk to us when discussing their financial picture is, first and foremost, if you can have a fund set aside that's a bank account that helps protect you for 3, 4, 6 months of expenses in case you were to not get hired or lose a job. Having that safety net is the first and foremost best place to go to access capital. But if you need to go into your 401k, which traditionally the government has set it up as an avenue that's supposed to be for long-term return expectations and long-term planning, which is why you mentioned 59 and a half. Technically, you're not allowed to distribute from a 401k plan until after you reach age 59 and a half. Now, there
Or
are
you'll pay
certain
penalties,
rules.
right? You'll pay income
without
tax and
paying penalties. Now, there are certain rules like hardship withdrawals and other things that you can take in the meantime. But also on top of that, you can actually take a loan from your 401k. Now, a lot of these rules depend on who is servicing your 401k or who's the custodian. So I would check with them as well. But a lot of them allow for loans. And what's actually beneficial from a loan from a 401k is not only are you the borrower, you are also the lender. So if you're paying an interest rate to a loan, it actually is getting paid to yourself in your 401k account. So loans can be beneficial for short-term needs. But remember, there are rules around loans. You can only take up to half of your 401k balance, up to a limit of $50,000. So if your 401k balance has $10,000, you're only able to take a loan of $5,000.
And what about the investment side of it, Nick? So I'm invested in primarily equities because, my plan was to use it in retirement. How might you think about changing that if you think you're going to need to tap it or you're worried about a recession?
Yeah, I think from a long-term perspective, it depends on your age and your objective. If you're long-term investments and you want long-term potential return, looking at equities and stocks are always going to give you the best potential return looking 10 plus years. Now, the flip side of that is you mentioned, what if I do need to tap this potentially, whether it be a loan, a hardship withdrawal? Then you might look at owning things like fixed income, might be more lucrative. And the reason I say that is when we're looking at investing in the world of investing, you're looking at certain assets that are either going to provide a return metric that you prefer or a risk level that you prefer. For us, that's always saying, what is going to give us the best risk return profile? So I don't want much risk, but I know I'm going to give up some return. And fixed income traditionally has been a protective asset class that's been able to help during a recession when equity markets might be declining. Think about 2008. You look at the US stock market, it dropped 37%. If you look at emerging markets, so looking at investments in Asia, South America, and other areas, that was down 57% or 52%. But if you look at something like fixed income, specifically municipal bonds or things that are safer, they're actually up 6%. They were positive for the year.
So if you're worried about a recession and you might need to tap that money, think about getting a little bit more conservative and moving some of those stocks into bonds because you'll have less volatility, and that might be a better short-term play.
Yep. And I will say one of the positives of this environment is interest rates are high. So when you go to, let's say your bank account's at Chase, you might be earning very little to next to nothing. But if you go to an online savings account like a Capital One, you could earn 4.5%, close to 5% yield now because interest rates are higher. If you looked at 3 years ago, you were earning nothing no matter where you went. If it was a CD, a treasury bill, a bank account. But now, even in 401k plans, they do have accounts that they may call them a stable value fund or a money market fund that might be paying 4.5%, 5% yield. So that might be sufficient enough for you in the short term where, okay, I'm willing to give up that upside potential to know I have a little bit more safety and liquidity in the short term.
Yeah, good points, Nick. We have a couple more questions here. So Tracy, get ready. You ready? Here we go.
Yeah.
In connecting how to stand out from other applicants in the job hunting process and the job market itself, sometimes it seems like there are not enough jobs within the companies you're applying for. I've seen comments about some companies posting jobs and then removing them because they're not actually hiring. What are your thoughts on companies hiring for roles and if they are looking for people to fill said roles?
I think it's interesting that you would post for a role and then take it down. So it could be that they're hiring internally and that they need to post it externally. I think that's not really fair. I think you should probably, even if you have a strong internal candidate, you should still at least look at and take some external candidates as well. I don't know if there's a specific instance that this person could think about, but it just seems interesting to me. The only thing that I can think of is that maybe the company is not as well organized as we would like. So they're hearing, oh, let's hire someone. And so the HR person or whoever, hiring manager, posts the position and then they're like, oh, actually, we changed our mind about that. I've been through that where we've gotten down to final round interviews and then it was decided, we actually don't think that this position is needed. And I was very frustrated. You're wasting the candidate's time, you're wasting our time. These are things that, some of it has to just do with the internal dynamics of the company. I also think there could be some where they're just not happy with the candidates that they're getting. And it could be that they, if we are talking about going into a recession, maybe they're looking for higher caliber candidates to come through the door with certain levels of experience, education, certifications, that maybe they put it out there and a bunch of people applied, but no one had kind of that perfect resume. So they said, no, we don't even want to move forward with this role because we're not seeing those things.
Okay.
So it seems like maybe there's some internal things going on with the organization itself.
Yeah, and your first point's a good one. I've been in organizations where the rule is you can't just hire someone internally, you have to post externally. So they do that, but they may already have that candidate lined up. I've seen that before. We have 2 more questions. They keep popping up now. You ready?
Sure.
I'm waiting to hear back from another job opportunity that I'm really passionate about, but wouldn't start till next summer or fall if accepted. Ideally, I would still like to apply to other jobs and work until I can hear back from that opportunity. But how do I proceed in the job search? Should I be honest with the jobs that I'm interviewing with now? I know most jobs usually are looking for more permanent applicants.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I first would maybe reach out to the organization you're waiting to hear back from and ask if they have a timeline of when they're looking to make that decision. That will help you be able to nail down, okay, yes, I got it, I'm excited. Or, sorry, disappointment. Let's now pivot and start kind of actively searching again. I think, yes, you probably should be honest with the companies that you're interviewing with, but I would also encourage this person to look at contract or temp work. I think recruiters are actually really great at helping out to find some of those temp or contract positions that can be, shorter periods of time, 6 months, a year. So that would be maybe an avenue that you would go down, but I would certainly, maybe not in the first interview with a company, but I would certainly, if you're going in for a second round or a third round, you certainly want to be open with them and say, I have this other opportunity that I want to make you aware of that, I would be looking, I would need to leave if I do receive that. But I would really encourage this person to reach out first to the organization that they're waiting to hear back from and hopefully get a better timeline of when they're looking to make that decision. It's not really fair to you or to any of the other candidates if they're stringing it along and making it a much longer drawn out process than it needs to be. They should really hopefully set those expectations for you so that then you can kind of plan accordingly.
Couple more. At what point should one consider paying a recruiter? You were talking about a recruiter a minute ago to help with securing that initial job.
So all the recruiters that I've worked with were all free because they're hired by the company or organization to place someone. So the way that normally works is that, if you're a company, you use a recruiter, you have to pay that recruiter a certain percentage of that person's initial compensation once they start. And then so it all comes from the employer. I am less familiar with you having to pay a recruiter to find you positions. So I'm not really sure.
I have the same experience that you do. Yeah, I haven't seen that either.
I would be cautious about that, and I would want to know like what their timeline is and how successful they are. What's their success rate in placing people, and how long are those people there for? Because it might be, we have 100% success rate, but they only last a month at those jobs. It's like, all right, well, maybe I wouldn't exactly call that 100% success rate. So I would do your due diligence and kind of looking at the cost of it and what their placements are and how successful they are at those placements.
I would agree. That's unusual. When there's no job advertised, what are some unique ways to get in touch with a hiring manager or recruiter? LinkedIn can be flooded.
Yeah, I would go to that specific company's website, potentially try to find that person's email address or the way that they normally set up their emails. So, most places it's like first initial last name at companyname.com. So that can be a way to hopefully reach out directly. I would also encourage people to network. We didn't really talk about networking yet, but I think networking is really important. The cliche of it's not what you know, it's who you know. But I think trying to network, that also allows you to practice you being able to talk about your skills, your experience. But maybe, you can look at LinkedIn and see if you have any common connections that you can reach out to someone else and say, hey, I saw that you're connected with this person. Can you help facilitate an introduction to that person? But I think also I handle the admin box for the club. So people will send in an email saying, you know, I'm interested in any opportunities that you have. Here's my resume. Here's kind of what I'm interested in, but I'm really open to anything. So I would say, like, don't be afraid to pursue a few different avenues without being too kind of pushy. So reach out if they have just a general communications mailbox that you can email to. Look at, like I said, those other connections potentially, and the company website itself.
Okay, Tracy, we have 2 more questions. I'm not sure we'll have time for them. We'll do them in order. Let's at least get the next one in. How would you address taking a job that involves a pay cut? Is it better to take a job to have a job, or to hold out for something where you feel your skills and experience are properly compensated?
Yep. So another great question. I think, you know, I hate to say, oh, it depends, but it depends. It depends on how much of a pay cut it is, if you're able to financially sustain yourself. And I also think, maybe more importantly, what's the opportunity for growth at that organization? Are they going to be invested in you, or do they internally promote people? Is there other benefits such as education, certification benefits that they would help financially support you in, that can further you as an individual and build your resume and your experience, that maybe isn't necessarily, you know, salary compensation, but is something that will help out in the long run. So I think it depends, but I think you want to ask yourself, is this a good company to work for? Can I see myself growing and developing? And do they actively help grow and develop the people within the organization?
Tracy, some great ideas. Appreciate it. Nick, thanks for being on today. I'm just cognizant of time. I'll do a very quick 1-minute wrap up and turn it over to Samantha. And Samantha, if you could also maybe address, we have some unanswered questions, how we might help with that. So again, I think some great ideas today. Just in summary, recessions typically don't last that long. They can still feel very painful when you're going through them. If you think you're going to need to tap your 401k plan, there typically are loan provisions. If you're going to have to tap it, get a little bit less aggressive with your investment allocation. And from a hiring standpoint, I think Tracy made a lot of good points. One is to make sure that you're as valuable as you can be to your current employer, and more apt to stick with them as we go through a recession. Again, if you're having trouble and you're not getting the results you want now, I think UConn can help. If you email Samantha, she can put you in touch with someone from UConn that can help with resume building and interviewing. And with that, thank you both for being with us. Great job today as panelists. And thank you all for tuning in today. And let me turn it back over to you, Samantha.
Randy, thank you. Tracy, Nick, a lot of great information, a lot of information, helpful information. I know I learned some tips and tricks. So I appreciate the 3 of you being on. To Randy's point, there are some more questions out there. And for those of you who didn't type a question and are curious on some of the content, please send me an email. I put it in the chat, but it is smavery@foundation.uconn.edu. If the panelists are comfortable, I'd be happy to either connect you, but I will also be able to put you in touch with some UConn resources. So thank you so much for your time. This is recorded and it will be put on the YouTube page along with some other events that we've had in the past and going forward. So with that being said, thank you and go Huskies.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Take care, everyone. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Great job.